Welcome back to Radio Taiwan International. You're listening to Geek Out. What's your cup of tea? What tickles your fancy or floats your boat? Join us as we share passions from people in Taiwan and around the world. I'm your host, Michelle Chang, and today in the studio we have our very own Marianne Shoko.
Hi, Michelle. Hello, everyone.
But yeah, what are we geeking out about today?
We are going to geek out about my sideline.
Mm-hmm.
I do part-time work for the police here in Taiwan and also the courts.
Okay.
Yeah, I do interpretation for both English and Filipino.
Oh, that's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
You actually speak Tagalog?
Yes, I do.
Oh, that's neat.
I was born and raised in the Philippines, so I speak English, Mandarin, and Filipino.
Oh, that's neat. Well, we were just speaking earlier about how, people who geek out about their jobs obviously do so because they really enjoy what they do.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't exactly, I'm going to say a lot of our audience, including me, don't quite understand what your job entails. Can you describe what you do?
So whenever there is a case, both in the police or with the courts here in Taiwan, sometimes they encounter a lot of foreigners and they need an interpreter to assist by providing like a common language. Not everyone speaks Mandarin.
Oh, right.
And we also have a lot of migrant workers.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't necessarily have someone in the police force or in the courts who can speak their language.
Exactly.
So just to ensure that everyone's rights are protected and that the legal process is followed correctly, they usually hire an interpreter to assist during
So you're actually that person?
Yes.
Oh, that's neat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have joked before that my extent of knowledge of the legal system is by watching episodes of Law and Order.
Right. Hey, I also want to make clear that I'm not a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what I do is just to provide interpretation services.
Right.
It's very important as an interpreter that you don't put in or add your own personal opinion.
Absolutely.
During the process,
Mm-hmm.
right?
It's in that way very similar to news writing because as a reporter, we don't want to put our own opinion into the piece. You're simply reflecting the news that you're receiving and then outputting back into the public. So as an interpreter, it's the same, I would imagine.
Yes, it is. Actually, the police and the courts emphasize on that fact.
Oh, very important.
And if you add on or distort or neglect to provide the facts as the person is telling you,
Mm-hmm.
you are actually liable under the law.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that if you choose to do this line of work, you're not going to be malicious about it. You're in it to help people.
Oh, totally.
Right.
Right. One of the things that I wanted to share to people was that usually when you encounter situations dealing with the police or with the courts, first thing is I want to tell people not to freak out.
Yeah, because it is really scary.
Sure, it is. And then as a foreigner in a different country, you sometimes feel that you don't have any options
You're right.
except to suffer whatever situation that you're going through. I want people to understand that that's not necessarily the case. Whenever you're undergoing, let's say, a police case or a court case, you can always ask for assistance. There are options available to you. As a foreigner, you can always approach your representative office and ask for assistance.
Right.
Tell them that you have a police case or you have a court case that you are going through and see if they can offer some kind of assistance to you.
Being an expat in Taiwan, I've heard many people express fear whenever they are either whenever they found themselves in a situation where they require legal counsel, or they're even afraid to do certain things for fear of putting themselves in that position because they feel they don't have much power here as far as being able to communicate just to communicate.
Their concerns, right?
Their concerns.
Yes. I also want to let people know that in Taiwan, there is a foundation called the Legal Aid Foundation. So if, let's say, for example, you find yourself in a situation where you have to undergo civil or criminal case, you can approach that foundation and request for assistance to see if they can provide you with free legal aid.
Right. By the way, guys, if you are actually interested in contacting, if you need help, we will attach the contact information to the episode at the bottom of the summary, the profile.
Sure.
So yes, if you need help, please feel free.
Yeah. The Legal Aid Foundation, just so that people are also aware, they do have an evaluation process. they first determine what case you're going through and how much, because of course there are limited resources.
Of course.
So they assign lawyers to assist with criminal or civil cases, but there is still an evaluation. At least there is still that option available.
Oh yeah, I can imagine that some people would contact him about really silly things. So
No comment.
So if yes, they have to filter that a little bit.
Yeah.
But right, to be able to provide help where it's truly needed.
Yeah.
So can you tell us, for example, your process throughout, say, a day if you do need to assist someone?
Okay, for a police case, the police would contact me if they need assistance going through an interrogation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Or getting a statement from a person who's filing a police case, and they're not as fluent, or they have concerns that maybe the message is not being
Communicated.
correctly.
Right.
Yeah, being
Correctly communicated.
exactly. So then I would go to the police station, and then basically I just interpret what the police is saying in Mandarin,
Right.
and then interpret that in English or Filipino, and then vice versa. So I'm just like Google Translate during the whole process.
I'm sure you're better than Google Translate.
So yeah.
I do have to share. I used to manage teachers in Taiwan for a company that I will not name, and there was a situation where I think it was nearly 3 a.m. Thankfully, I'm a night owl, so I was still awake at that time. I got a phone call from one of my guys, and he was calling from a police station saying he'd been arrested.
Oh.
And first of all, the terror in his voice was
Sure.
palpable because he was freshly in Taiwan. I think he'd only been here about a month, maybe 2.
Right.
So not quite understanding the legal reasons why he was arrested, he was quite scared. And
Sure.
he may or may not have resisted the police when they tried to
Arrest him.
detain him, right? So I went to the police station to help, and I found that he had been handcuffed to a wall in a padded cell, and he was just... They had no color in his skin, and he was just so scared.
Okay.
Because anyone who doesn't speak Mandarin fluently
Sure.
would find themselves
Right.
feeling extremely without resources.
Right.
You know, what are they supposed to do?
Right.
Oh my goodness, this actually will impact my life substantially. So it is really great. In my case, I was just able to talk him through the process by translating a bit. But in your case, then it would be a much bigger help because you understand the legal process of things.
I guess I'll just go through really quickly the legal process here.
Sure.
So when a case starts in the police station, it's usually done because somebody filed a case or you are being called to give a statement regarding a case somebody filed against you.
Oh.
That's the first step, and the police would be calling in the different parties to get their statements. During this time, you can choose to have a lawyer with you, but then that would be out of your
usually
own
costly,
pocket. Yeah, right. But it is your right, and you can choose to get a lawyer, a defense lawyer for your case.
Right.
The defense lawyers during that time, what they can do is they can take note of what was said, but they cannot interrupt the process.
I see. Okay.
Right. They cannot, at that point, it's still under investigation. So there's nothing to defend yet, if you know what I mean.
Yes, charges have not been...
Right.
filed.
There's just been it's not a formal civil or criminal case at that point, right? So the statements are taken by the police, and once that's done, this is forwarded to the prosecutor.
I see.
The prosecutor then determines whether or not the law was broken.
I see.
If the law was broken, then it becomes a criminal case.
Right.
It becomes a civil case if there's compensation involved.
I see. Okay.
To some degree.
There's some kind of lawsuit.
Right. So once the prosecutor has decided whether or not the law was broken, then officially you have a case in the courts.
Right.
Then you get summoned by the court, and then they'll go through the legal process of verifying the facts.
And you would be an interpreter, not specifically you, but interpreter would be useful during this entire journey.
Sure. Usually from the police station, whenever, let's say, they call somebody to get their statement, if there is a language barrier, the interpreter would be asked to assist during the process.
Okay.
Just to assure people as well, usually the interpreters have to undergo training.
Of course, I would imagine this involves quite a bit of training. You need to know how to do this job well.
The training involves basically understanding your role as an interpreter. You're not supposed to add onto whatever statement is being given. You're not supposed to exaggerate, and at the same time, you're not supposed to withhold information.
Right.
They're very clear on the role that you're supposed to undertake
As
during
they
that
should
process.
be.
Right.
Yes, this is definitely involving someone's life.
Yes.
So I guess I have questions for you.
Sure.
Can you share maybe a couple of stories? Let's not focus on negative, but maybe a positive one of how you were able to help someone?
I mean, helping somebody during the whole process, I feel that I'm able to help somebody when I already provide the interpretation service, because at least they know what's going on.
Yes.
And one of the things that I really like about the Taiwan legal system, and I know for most people, they feel like this should be the norm, but in my experience, the police and the courts make it very clear to the person who is undergoing interrogation what their rights are. They state it very clearly, and they make sure that the interpreter tells them what their rights are.
That's good.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I actually admire and appreciate, because I feel that maybe
Well, they could not be clear about, people's rights, and then that would be very dangerous, I would imagine.
sure, because it's really actually they make it part of the process where they tell you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to
The
a
Miranda
defense
rights,
lawyer.
right?
Right, yeah. So that's one of the things I appreciate, and they actually do go through the process properly. They don't take shortcuts.
Excellent. You tend to see some movies and
Right.
TV shows of lawyers and
Right.
prosecutors and police officers
Right.
cutting corners and doing
Yes.
things improperly, and therefore making it extra scary. So that's good to hear that Taiwan actually does things by the book.
Yes. In my experience, I feel that they actually do. Yeah.
Any weird stories, wacky stuff that's happened?
I feel that sometimes when I do assist in cases, there are cultural misunderstandings.
As there are any time, more than one culture is involved.
One example, at least, that I can think of is drunk driving.
Oh yeah, which is something that's very frequent here, because I believe the quote unquote legal limit is really low.
Yes.
So in comparison to, say, the U.S., where you can actually have a drink and still drive legally.
When I say there's a cultural difference with regards to that, I kind of feel that the perception on drinking is different country to country.
Oh yes.
Like, sure, I'm pretty sure most countries would not encourage drunk driving.
Oh yes, and we are not. We by no means RTI does not encourage drunk
Sure.
driving.
Exactly.
Right.
If one has a drink, sometimes one doesn't think too far ahead in terms of like, okay, am I still
Okay to drive.
right? But in Taiwan, they're very strict about that.
Very.
And I would like to emphasize that it is a criminal case.
Oh, wow.
If you are caught like having had, a lot to drink, and then you went to
As
drive
it
a
should
car,
be. It should
or
be
yes.
a criminal case.
Right. So I'm just going to say, like, in the Philippines, as an example, they're not as strict in terms of the implementation of the law.
I see.
But whereas here in Taiwan, they are very strict. And then because you take the breathalyzer,
Yeah, they make you blow into the breathalyzer,
Right.
and then the limit is very low,
if I'm not mistaken, it's like 0.25.
something like that.
You're right. So the minute you go over, then definitely they're gonna go catch you, and you're gonna be fined. It's
right.
quite a heavy penalty. It's a quite heavy fine. And if I'm not mistaken, around the world, Taiwan has one of the most stringent rules when it comes to drinking and driving.
Right. Because that is something that can lead to a lot of hurt people.
Sure, definitely.
But for people coming into Taiwan and don't quite understand that particular point, that Taiwan is very strict when it comes
Right.
to drinking and driving, there can definitely be they don't understand,
Right.
and perhaps think that they can drive even after having one or two drinks. So.
Yes, and also resisting arrest.
Oh, and resisting arrest. I mean,
So if you had a drink and the police caught you,
yeah.
and then you make a big fuss
yeah.
about it, then you will be handcuffed.
Oh no.
And for a number of foreigners, they don't understand that bit because they feel like, dude, I
didn't blow that high.
or
Right.
like I'm not a murderer. I haven't really committed a serious crime.
So
there's that
why
perception.
are you arresting me? Right.
Right. Why am I being handcuffed like a really,
Yeah, I get that feeling. It's just cultural differences.
Right. But if you go back to what we were talking about earlier, I mean, in Taiwan, it is a criminal case.
Yes.
So then you will be handcuffed like a criminal.
Yes, much to people's dismay.
So,
and I also feel, coming from the U.S.
Right.
and living there for quite a while, the way that people see police here versus seeing police in the U.S. is very, very different. I mean, if you are pulled over in the U.S., me personally, there is a twinge of fear because police authorities do give off that kind of
aura.
right. We are a little bit scared of the police.
Sure.
So, but in Taiwan, not so much. I view them more as civil servants who are actually trying to help us. They're not as scary.
I would agree with that. And most of the police officers I've met, they're actually really quite nice.
Oh yeah.
And even during the process of when they're taking statements, they always tell me to make it clear to the person that they just want to get their version of the story.
Right. They're respectful about that.
Right.
That's great. I also have met my fair share of police officers in the U.S., and the ones that I've met were all really great guys. But I think in general, the society views police here in Taiwan as much more friendly and helpful rather than not. So, which I think then leads to resisting arrest.
That's a different story. If you resist arrest, then they won't be as friendly anymore, right?
That is true. Very, very true. I do have to thank you because it is not common for people to want to go into these kinds of occupations because I'm going to say is kind of scary and you are trying to help. So thank you for that. I think your physical presence in, say, an interrogation room is helpful because that person who probably feels very scared in that instant, sees you and can understand you. And it is should be a great burden lifted off their shoulders. They should be comforted.
They don't feel as alone.
Exactly.
I would agree with you on that. I would also like to clarify, though, that I am not a lawyer. I am not allowed to give legal advice.
Of course.
Right. And we're definitely not allowed to color the process in any shape or form. So usually when the interrogation starts, we have to do things by the book.
Right.
And so even after, so as not to mislead the investigation, we also don't necessarily give our personal opinions. Not because we don't want to help,
Right.
but we don't want to cause trouble.
Of course, because any small thing you say or may be misconstrued.
Right, exactly.
So
However, that said, I still would like to point out that whenever anyone is going through that process, they still have options to ask for help legally within their rights by going
Absolutely.
through the representative office
Yes.
or approaching organizations such as the Legal Aid Foundation.
yeah, thanks for geeking out with me, Marianne Shoko.
Hey, no, thank you for inviting me.
And thanks, listeners, for tuning in to Radio Taiwan International. I'm Michelle Chang, and we'll be back next Thursday with another episode of Geek Out.